Good afternoon, this is Sean Golden with Golding & Golding, here to do a quick presentation on a question we receive often. I used to be a U.S. person, I now live overseas, no longer a U.S. person, not a covered expatriate, because those rules are different. What happens if I want to take 401k withdrawals or distributions? Is the U.S. going to put their grubby hands in there and withhold some tax? So let's go through the basics. Jane used to work in the U.S., she was a green card holder. She worked at a company for 10 years. She was younger, never thought much about the 401k, but she maxed it out. It's 25 years later, and now Jane wants to take some distributions from the U.S. 401k. She has nothing to do with the U.S. anymore. She doesn't file any U.S. taxes. She doesn't have any sourced income. This is it. Okay, so is the 401k pension, with the 401k, of course, it hasn't been taxed, right? It's pre-taxed contribution. So generally, what's going to happen if you live overseas? Can the U.S. still tax it? And the answer is typically yes, but there may be ways around it. General rule, the administrator, 401k administrator, can withhold 30%. Okay, if it's a non-U.S. person, and this is important, not a U.S. citizen who lives overseas, but a non-U.S. person, they can typically file what's called a W-8BEN, and then they can seek to reduce the withholding based on any treaty provisions. So the U.S. has about 60 different tax treaties, bilateral income tax treaties, and a lot of those treaties provide for reduced withholding. So if the person qualifies for a W-8BEN instead of a W-9, which means they're a non-U.S. person, they can typically file this W-8 with the 401k administrator and have a reduced withholding. But the next step would be, even with this reduced holding, is it still taxable? And so we're dealing with tax treaty countries now, because if there's no tax treaty, then this doesn't apply. This is based on tax treaty provisions. So most tax treaties deal extensively with pension, okay? And you have residence and source, right? When you're dealing with something like Social Security, it's typically taxed at source. Social Security from one country being paid to someone in the other country is only taxable in the first country. With private pension, it's typically, but not always, okay? It's important that you check the treaty. Just because you read one or two doesn't mean you've read all 58, okay? You have to look at the one for your specific country, okay? But most of them say something like only the country where the person resides has the opportunity to tax the pension. That would be considered residence, of course. If you're a U.S. citizen, this generally doesn't apply because you have the saving clause, okay? So this is what you look at. First thing, is there a tax treaty between the United States and the country you're a resident of? Two, if there is, what does it say about pensions? Private pensions, right? 401k private pension, there is public equivalent. Those are generally different, and typically those are taxed at source. So first, is there a treaty? Two, is there a treaty with your country? Three, is there a provision regarding pension? Presumably there is. Four, does it based on residence or is it based on source? Assuming it's based on residence, the next step becomes, well, what does the saving clause say? The saving clause is something that's written into treaties to protect the countries, allowing countries to the treaty to tax the way they ordinarily would. It's primarily so like a U.S. citizen living overseas in a country that may not tax pension, for example, can't just say, oh, the treaty says the U.S. can't tax me, right? The U.S. operates on a worldwide income model. So you have to look at the saving clause, and oftentimes pension is going to be impacted from the saving clause. So the saving clause will say something like, hey, each country reserves the right to do whatever they want to you. But then normally the next paragraph will say exceptions to the saving clause, which means these exceptions are not impacted by the saving clause, so that whatever is written in the treaty about these provisions that are exempt from the saving clause will go forward. And you want to look and see whether private pensions are included. Oftentimes they are, but not the full amount. If there's 5 paragraphs to the article, some paragraphs may be exempt, others may not. And so that's the process you want to go to. And if that's what it is, then you may want to consider filing a return in order to a 1040 NR along with non-resident, along with an 8833 tax treaty position, and that's the way you go. At my firm here, we specialize exclusively in offshore disclosure. If you're out of compliance for prior years and you want to get into compliance, you've got some offshore reporting assets, investments, income, things of that nature, combined with your 401k issue, We have lots of free information available on our main website. Go through the different programs. There's voluntary disclosure, there's streamlined domestic, streamlined foreign, delinquency, and reasonable cause. Like I was saying, we have gobbles of information available on our main website and our sub-websites. You can always reach out and schedule a reduced fee initial consultation if it's appropriate and something that we handle. Again, my name is Sean Golding with Golding & Golding. Thank you for your time. Enjoy the rest of your day.